And now we'll begin the 2020 Digital Symposium.
Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Digital Symposium. My name is Alejandra Duque Cifuentes, and I am the Executive Director of Dance NYC. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a non-disabled Latina woman, originally from Medellin, Colombia, the unceded territory of the Nusabes people, currently home to the Embera Catio, Chami, Dovida, Senu, Quechua, and Inga populations. I have been working and living in Lenape Hoking for 15 years now. I would like to acknowledge that the city of New York is on stolen land, more specifically Lenape Hoking, the unceded traditional homeland of the Lenape people, who are also recognized federally as the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, Anadarko, Oklahoma, Delaware Tribe of Indians, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Stockbridge Munsee Community, Bowler, Wisconsin, and in Canada, Munsee Delaware Nation, Moravian of the Thames First Nation, Delaware of Six Nations. The Lenape people are the original inhabitants and caretakers of this land and gave Manhattan Island its name, Mannahatta, meaning hilly island, or place where we go to gather the wood for the boat. After the arrival of Dutch and British colonizers, the Lenape began to endure systemic attacks on their people and way of life that eventually led to their forced removal from the homeland they'd loved for over 10,000 years. The Dutch and British committed atrocious acts of murder and massacre, imprisonment, and warfare that included scalp bounties and decimation of plant and animal food sources that Lenape people depended on. In a concerted effort of land appropriation, Lenape people were forcibly removed from their land in an ongoing series of violent removals and relocations. Although New York City is home to the largest urban indigenous population in the United States, due to this forced migration, the systemic violence that continues today, the majority of Lenape people and their main political and cultural governance now resides in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, far from their homeland of Lenape Hoking. Additionally, as we gathered digitally and inspired by Adrian Wong's A Spiderweb show in what is currently called Canada, and the fellow presenters of HowlRound Theater earlier this week, I invite us to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities that at times leave significant carbon footprints contributing to climate change that disproportionately impact indigenous communities worldwide. We acknowledge that these inequities are our shared responsibility and our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. We recognize that as an organization based in New York City, Dance NYC has benefited and continues to benefit from this systemic displacement and subsequent erasure of Lenape people and governance. Today, we are working to first, ensure we learn and research best practices for acknowledging the land we occupy. Second, intentionally invest time, resources, and energy in establishing and nurturing relationships with local Indigenous and First Nations artists and organizations, and create opportunities with the many Indigenous artists living in New York City. And third, that we move beyond acknowledgement and into needed reparation and equity. Dance NYC must make concerted efforts to collaborate and make pathways for Lenape artists and leaders to return to Lenape Hoking today. Currently, there are many efforts in process to move us beyond acknowledgement and into needed reparation and equity. In 2019, for example, the Linate Center and First Nations Dialogue gifted the Accepting Black corn seeds to New Yorkers and international visitors with the request that this food be reintroduced and planted throughout the original Lenape homeland of Lenape Hoking in an effort to rematriate the land and call Lenape people back home. This legacy corn, an embodied form of land acknowledgement, can be found growing in Campos community gardens and many public schools in the East Village of Manhattan. Please join me in taking a moment to recognize and reflect on the centuries of violence, displacement, forced migration, and settlement here, as well as the centuries of resilience and leadership on behalf of all Indigenous and First Nations people on Turtle Island that have led to our presence and livelihoods in New York City today. For all of you tuning in from various parts of New York City and beyond, we encourage you to participate in this acknowledgement by considering the history of the local land you occupy and what reparations you can begin to make today. Let's hold a collective moment of silence by breathing together and connecting with our bodies, our land, and this history. Thank you. Before I hand the mic over to my colleagues, I want to provide some context for Dance NYC's regular practice of land acknowledgements at our meetings and public gatherings. For us, land acknowledgements accomplish the following. They create a greater awareness of the history of oppression and genocide on Turtle Island, as well as the ongoing project of settler colonialism today. It helps us acknowledge the violence and displacement of Indigenous and First Nations communities that we continue to dislocate, extract, and benefit from. And it offers recognition and respect to the original Indigenous and First Nations inhabitants of the places we call home. This ongoing process began for us with our own research and understanding what land acknowledgements are in the first place, what they mean to us organizationally, and how, as settlers on this land acknowledgements help Dance NYC work towards its resolute goal of deepening our learning around this country's history of oppression, genocide, and continuous colonization of Indigenous and First Nations people, of embodying allyship and accomplishment, and of ensuring our time is followed by, our learning, is followed by concrete, actionable next steps and the investment of time, resources, and energy. It was necessary for us to undergo this learning on our own first, with resources that were readily available to us, rather than placing the burden of that learning on Indigenous and First Nations people. The next step for us is moving our learning into a practice of relationship to ensure the direct and vested involvement of Lenape Hoking leadership, of Indigenous artists, arts organizations, and advocates in Dance NYC's efforts to honor the land and the histories of the land on which we work, host events, and serve our constituents. That process has just begun through our partnership with Emily Johnson and the conversation and partnerships that aim to follow. We often get asked by other artists and organizations to share our land acknowledgement language and/or protocol. At this time, these are materials that we actually do not share, because for us at Dance NYC, the practice of doing our own research with the tools and resources available to the public online, the process of crafting the words and deciding how and in what way we speak about the land we collectively work on is an integral part of the acknowledgement itself. Moreover, we've understood that there is no arrival point. Rather, it is a living, ongoing process of learning, nurturing relationships, practicing, adjusting, and repeat over and over again. For Dance NYC, this currently means hosting land acknowledgements at public convening like the one we're at today, as well as at every board meeting and staff meeting. The learning is continuous for us and necessary. The land acknowledgement does not begin or end with this moment that we're sharing. Moreover, this moment is not meant to spotlight Dance NYC as an organization. On the contrary, it is a necessary moment of reflection and transparency within our largest yearly gathering to honor the Lenape people, past, present, and future, for their continued presence in their homeland and through the Lenape diaspora, as well as the leadership and continued presence of Indigenous and First Nations people in Turtle Island. I would also like to take a moment to wholeheartedly thank Emily Johnson for her instrumental and continuous guidance of Dance NYC's current land acknowledgement practice. As one of the guest curators of the 2020 Symposium, Emily has curated several sessions for the in-person version dedicated to embodying land acknowledgements and dismantling colonial practices. We hope to share some of those with you later on this year. But today, of those sessions, you will experience this morning's keynote, Solidarity, Power, and Resonance, Indigenous-led measures of culture shift in performance and potentiality. We encourage you to tune in to the keynote and lean in as a way of getting started on your own learning and personal practice of reparation. Emily, in turn, acknowledges her past and ongoing collaboration and learning in the efforts of embodied land acknowledgement with directors of the Lenape Center, Joe Whittle and Mia Natanek of the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, and Jane Anderson, intellectual property and Indigenous rights lawyer and associate professor of anthropology and museum studies at NYU. I will now hand it over to my colleague Candace, who will continue this moment of reflection with a historical acknowledgement.
Hello, my name is Candace Thompson Zachery, Manager of Justice, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives at Dance NYC. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a non-disabled Black West Indian woman. I operate between the spheres of dance, cultural production, and fitness and wellness with a focus on the contemporary Caribbean. I'm from Barataria, Trinidad and Tobago, the unceded territory of the Kalina, Waro, Kalipuna, Nepuyo, Taino, Arawaka people, and the currently active Carib community. I have been working and living in Lenape-Hoking territory for 15 years now. In years prior, Dance NYC has included site-specific historical acknowledgements as part of its Indigenous land acknowledgements. However, based on our learning, we feel that these are two different components of our practice of recognition. Hence, we wanted to honor them as separate but related moments. The following are by no means the only areas or tactics of oppression through which white supremacy, settler colonialism has enacted and sustained its power over time, but rather the main focuses of Dance NYC's ongoing historical acknowledgement practice. Through the African slave trade, migration and immigration patterns, the disability rights movement, and the LGBTQ+ fight for justice. We would like to acknowledge the enslaved workers, freedom fighters, and cultural leaders of African ancestry who were forcibly brought to what is now known as New York City, the atrocities they endured, and what they taught us about collective liberation. During the colonial period, 41% of the city's households had enslaved Africans. Only Charleston, South Carolina, rivaled New York in the extent to which slavery penetrated everyday life. Slavery was no milder in the urban North than in the Deep South, and they performed a huge share of the heavy labor of building New York's infrastructure. Enslaved Africans constructed Fort Amsterdam. They built the wall that gives Wall Street its name. They built the roads, the docks, and most of the important buildings of the early city. We also celebrate their legacy through the free Black societies of Seneca Village and Weeksville, through the cultural epicenters of Harlem and the South Bronx, and honor their spirits at the African Burial National Ground Monument. We recognize the many populous immigrant communities from Eastern Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, and how they have shaped the New York City that we know and experience. These groups have endured living through harsh conditions, low wages, continuous displacement, and racial and ethnic discrimination, and continue to be plagued by persecution and lack of access to basic needs while undertaking the essential labor of this town. They are our nannies and delivery carriers, nurses and teachers, and political leaders and historians. We honor their contributions to the diversity and cosmopolitan culture that this city now celebrates, from Chinese Lunar New Year to West Indian Carnival, from the Festival of Holi to El Dia de los Reyes Magos. Immigrants have shown us what it means to live out loud. Lastly, and part of our commitment to fostering equity in dance and culture, Dance NYC seeks to dismantle ableism and amplify the voices and autonomy of disabled people through advocacy, action-oriented research, re-granting programs, and more. At this time, I want to honor the history behind one of Dance NYC's guiding principles, Nothing Without Us. Nothing Without Us is a slogan that comes from the disability rights movement and was popularized in the 1990s by disability activist James Charlton through its use by South African disability activists Michael Masutha and William Rowland. The term stems from nothing about us without us, which communicates that no policy or practice should be created without the direct vesting of the affected group. The community knows the needs of its people best, so they need to steer the ship. Disability activist Lawrence Carter Long repositioned the phrase with the shorter "Nothing Without Us," which we have since adopted as an organizational value through the establishment of our Disability Dance Artistry Task Force, and informs all aspects of our work in all program areas. Accessibility is a core area of our programming and planning, evident here as well for our annual symposium. Ensuring accessible routes and facilities, incorporating interpreters, braille and closed captioning, and centering the work, scholarship, and direction of disabled artists is a critical component of each year's in-person event. These priorities carry over in turning today's gathering into a digital event. We have ASL interpreters from LC Interpreting Services with us pinned to the right corner of the screen and closed captioning at the bottom of the screen. If any images are used, they will be described orally. New York City's fast pace and glorification of ableist and oppressive values must be opposed at every turn, as we understand that ableist practices are deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, eugenics, colonialism, and capitalism. We recognize that this includes, but is not limited to, access to independent and safe transportation, employment, and healthcare. Please join me in taking another moment to recognize and reflect on the histories that have led us to today. We encourage you to participate in this acknowledgement with us by considering the history of the local land you currently occupy and what reparations you can begin to make today. Let's take another moment of silence. Thank you. And lastly, given our current times, we want to take a moment to recognize the unseen labor of the many people that continue to ensure the safety and well-being of our community in these trying times, including but not limited to grocery store clerks, truck drivers, medical professionals, restaurant workers, neighbors, warehouse workers, farmers, janitors, garbage collectors, and other sanitation workers, power, water, and utilities workers, and the many people that remain active, working from home while also caring for their families, including single mothers and people who may experience an increased risk of domestic and gender-based violence. So I'll turn it over to Alejandra now, who will take us into the core of our symposium today.
Thank you, Candace, and thank you to all of you for joining us in these practices of recognition of our history, our present, and in many ways also our future. Good morning to all of you. Good morning, dance community. Good morning, arts and culture community, and welcome to Dance NYC's 2020 Digital Symposium. This year, we find ourselves under challenging circumstances, And as such, we found a way to maintain our commitment to you and to the field through this uniquely structured digital event. I am delighted to welcome you all to the symposium and to acknowledge some of the leaders who have made today possible. For those of you who may be new to our organization and its work, this is the only annual gathering of its kind for the dance community in the metropolitan New York City area. And it's the cornerstone of Dance NYC's leadership, training, networking, and convening portfolio. Dance NYC delivers 5 core services to the field: advocacy, action-oriented research, leadership training and convening, technological resources through our website, dance.nyc, and grant making. To empower dance makers and cultural workers, create audiences, and strengthen the collective voice for the art form. Created as an independent nonprofit in 2013, Dance NYC works in alliance with the national service organization Dance USA to drive local national synergies in dance service delivery. You can learn more about our programs on our website at www.dance.nyc. There is a strong team behind all of Dance NYC's work and today's event. I thank my fellow directors and advisors, and especially Dance NYC's advisory committee member, Jody Gottfried Arnhold, for her continued support of the annual symposium. I thank our symposium programming committee, our guest curators, and all of the volunteers involved. I thank our board of directors for their leadership, and most importantly, the Dance NYC staff for their heroic work in the past couple of weeks preparing behind the scenes. And I want to thank all of you for being with us in these challenging times. Please now join me in recognizing some of the leadership, support, and funders that have allowed us to make today possible. So I'm now sharing a slide with the logos of our key funders. Each of the logos and the people I'm going to name, I'm going to mention out loud. So first, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which is supporting our work to reveal and address inequities that exist in professional dance, and the Howard Gilman Foundation, as well as the New York State Council of the Arts and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. On the next slide, we thank our partners, Jody Gottfried Arnhold, our lead dance advocate, Con Edison, our corporate sponsor, our wonderful partners at Hunter College and the Hunter Dance Department, who we thank for their support in this year's original iteration of this symposium and who is still welcoming us home, as well as our partners at Gibney, New York Life Arts, and the National Dance Institute. We also thank many nonprofit educational partners. Now I'm showing a new slide with their logos, and I'm going to say their names now. Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, American Ballet Theater, Ballet Hispanico, CUNY Dance Initiative, Dance Theater of Harlem, Dance Parade, Dancers Responding to AIDS, Harkness Center for Dance Injuries, Jacob Pillow Dance, the Joyce Theater, LaGuardia Performing Arts Center, Mark Morris Dance Group, Marquee TV, Movement Research, New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, New York City Center, New York State Dance Education Association, NYU Tisch, Pentacle, Theater Development Fund, the Actors Fund, and Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. And on our next slide, we are sharing our justice, equity, and inclusion partners. Dance NYC's approach to increasing justice, equity, and inclusion in dance is grounded in collaboration. It has established partnerships with colleague arts service organizations that are mission-focused on increasing racial equity, inclusion and access for disabled people, and/or the integration of immigrants into arts and culture. Our partners include Art Beyond Sight, Art Space Sanctuary, Asian American Arts Alliance, Center for Traditional Music and Dance, International Association of Black in Dance, Indo-American Arts Council, Lotus Music and Dance, Museum Arts Culture Access Consortium, National Alliance of Latino Arts and Culture, New York Foundation for the Arts, and Women of Color in the Arts. Over this past year, Dance NYC has acted on its continued commitment to our justice, equity, and inclusion agenda to serve the field and ensure that power, funding, opportunities, conduct, and impact are fair for all participants, for all cultural workers, artists, and audiences. Our current research initiative, Defining Small Budget Dance Makers in a Changing Dance Ecology, is well underway. As we look back at what 2019 has brought to us, this initiative included a November research conference at Real Dance Center in Queens, co-curated by Brian Tate, the collection of survey data, and a final research meeting that will continue to inform our publication of our findings in June of 2020. In 2019, we also published Advancing Immigrant Dance Arts, a research report and the third research delivery of our initiative by the same name, focused on community organizing, co-powering, and building camaraderie among the immigrant dance artists and cultural workers who contributed to the report's findings. Continuing in our role as a grant maker, in 2019, our current projects included the New York City Dance Rehearsal Space Subsidy Program, made possible by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to make affordable rehearsal space available to dance makers across the 5 boroughs. The Dance Advancement Fund, made possible by the Ford Foundation to support dance makers with budgets between $25,000 and $1 million. And the Disability Dance Artistry Residency Program, made possible by the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, Create NYC Disability Forward Fund, to expand opportunities for disabled dance makers. 2019 was really quite a full year. As we move into this year, we respond to an unprecedented moment for our community locally, nationally, and globally. At the height of a volatile national and international climate, feeling the urgency of a global health crisis and the need to organize as artists, cultural workers, supporters, and citizens, we enter this space in recognition of both the resiliency of our art form and its necessity in this time. We also understand the deleterious financial impact that the coronavirus will have on the dance community and is already having. In particular, organizations and artists depending on in-person gatherings, classes, and performances as sources of earned income. We also recognize that African, Latina, Latino, Latinx, Asian, Arab, and Native American, immigrant, and disabled artists may face additional challenging accessing resources at this time. As an organization that champions New York City dance makers, cultural workers, educators, and audiences, we see this digital symposium as an opportunity to address the many challenges that are before us, to learn from each other's experiences, to access new information and resources, and to collectively grieve, to strategize, and to recommit to solidarity. 2020 will be a trying year for all of us in arts and culture, making the issues of racial justice and the fight to dismantle ableism and xenophobia even more urgent to our practices, our policies, and to our future safeguarding against disaster. In responding to this moment, Dance NYC has taken several concrete actions, First, we have been assessing the concerns, challenges, and needs of the New York City dance community through our coronavirus impact survey. Many thanks to all of you that have taken the time to fill that out. Second, We have created, as many organizations have, a resource page on our website that outlines live updates on national, state, and local responses for this crisis, and includes grant and funding opportunities for individual workers and organizations. And lastly, we have partnered with our city, state, and national partners to advocate on behalf of dance, arts, and cultural workers, and ensure that they are supported and represented at every level of government as policies and bills are created to respond to this crisis. We aim to be at the forefront of advocating for your access to essential resources and ensure the members of our community are cared for. Please stay tuned as we release initiatives and continue to share resources in the coming weeks. And please know, on behalf of every one of the 10 staff members of Dance NYC, our contract workers, our board and committee members, that we are doing everything in our power to serve you. We see you, we hear you. Help is on the way.
Thank you, Alejandra. So as we turn our attention to today's digital sessions, I wanted to share a bit more about our intended topics for 2020. This year's focus on 21st century models for building a resilient and thriving dance ecosystem has definitely taken a sharp turn and has highlighted how much work there is to be done while honoring the creative responses and adaptability the field has already shown. It is predicated upon our view that the many parts of the dance world, from studio spaces to the writer's computer, from those who sew our costumes to those who take notes in rehearsals, from those who instruct the next generation to those who step out boldly on stages, that each and every person, space, role, and function are necessary parts of a whole. Dance NYC has convened a strong group of artists, leaders, and experts to speak to the pressing concerns of our community, including wage and labor rights, financial strategy, advocacy for disabled and immigrant artists, and including learning from Indigenous-led movements and artist practices for thriving. Grounded in our value of nothing without us and building on our model of shared programmatic leadership, the conversations, workshops, and presentations that you will experience today have been nimbly shepherded by a team of passionate dance workers and cultural organizers who are invested in this work, both professionally and personally, as members of deep generational creative lineages and peoples. Our Symposium Programming Committee, guest curators Ali-Rosa Salas and Emily Johnson, and staff, Dance NYC's Manager of Justice, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives, that's me, and Symposium Coordinator Brenda Guha worked together with the executive leadership of Alejandra, Duque, Cifuentes to bring many urgent topics to bear at today's gathering. We hope that you are able to bring your full selves to the sessions and truly celebrate the weight of these discussions and how they might enhance your values, operations, and skillful maneuvering in our shared dance workplace, New York City. And now please join me in welcoming our guest curators for this year, Ali-Rosa Salas and Emily Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ali-Rosa Salas, and it's an honor to be sharing screen space with you all this morning. I am currently in New York City, Linate, Hope King, where I have been based for the past 28 years. And I just wanted to share some remarks with everyone tuning in today around the framing for this year's symposium. Dance in NYC propels freedom of movement beyond the proscenium. And situating dance beyond the proscenium is not purely conceptual lip service anymore, but as we now all know, is a public health mandate. As we've seen currently and for eons, the frayed threads of late stage capitalism and its impact on our performing arts ecosystem are fully exposed. The drive towards production in all senses of the word is coming to a screeching halt now, as artists and administrators alike are navigating a reorientation of personal and professional priorities. It's glaringly clear that artistic practice cannot and has never existed in an apolitical vacuum. And it's our responsibility to galvanize the collective uncertainty of this moment to put into motion value systems that are going to heal us, our work, and our world. Values like equity over essentialism, interdependence over competition, care over negligence, and abundance over austerity. Today's convening is going to amplify how these values are already being actualized in dance making and advocacy and administration. So today and always, let's listen to each other generously and commit to radical action because the time is now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ali and Alejandra and Candace and everyone gathered. I'm Emily Johnson, and I'm a Yupik woman. I grew up in Alaska on Dena'ina and Kinaitsi land, and I live now on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in Lenape-Hoking. And it is really an honor to be here and to be thinking and processing with you all. And those of you who have heard me speak before know that I have a shaky public speaking voice. I'm fine, but that just happens. And especially now, I think emotions are high and that will happen, but I'm fine and am here with you in power. I also wanted to share a few words as we move forward together. So I view our bodies as everything, culture, history, present, and future simultaneously. Out of respect for and trust in our bodies and collective memories, I give equal weight to story and image, to movement and stillness, to what I imagine and to what I do not know. And I'm speaking as a dance maker and as an organizer. And dance, as we all know, here gathered, is always in us, blood moving, synapses firing, air flowing. Dance, as we all know, is always around us, people moving, birds flying, whales migrating, trees growing. My intentions for co-curating this time together with Dance NYC and Ali center Indigenous knowledges with the realities and conditions of moving beyond definitive borders of discipline, colonial geography, and time. Indigenous practices of embodiment, including space and time travel, are part of my daily work. And I try to manifest what I know and what I know is possible when we come together with good intention, enough time, and support. And now more than ever, we need our collective intentions and time turned toward one another and into the depths of ourselves. We need to support the brilliant processes we know as dance makers, artists, dancers, educators, producers, and administrators, and continue to be a vitally creative force in the world. Even if that force right now includes more rest than most of us are used to. We need to hold our collective spirit so that we can move, really move toward fullness and toward a world we want, one healed from colonial constructs, existing in possibility, where inhabitants enact responsibly with radical relationship and love for one another, all beings, land, water, past, present, and future. It's important to note that this is not the first time in this country that groups of people have not been allowed to come together to dance and share ceremony. Indigenous people gained our right to dance only in 1978 after government bans. We must recognize the ways in which we need to amplify safety together, and in that calm. We need to recognize that bans and quarantines and even social distancing can trigger trauma from racism, homophobia, ableism, and in the worst cases are examples of such. Let us honor what we know is possible. Let us work together to be able to come together in the many varied and ongoing forms we can right now and in the future, to share our moving knowledge with the world and with one another. And I just want to really, really thank everyone at Dance NYC who really, really, really has done so much work to bring this time together that we can all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We're going to shift gears into our first keynote session of the day. I'm pleased to introduce today's opening keynote on solidarity, power, and resonance, Indigenous-led measures of culture shift in performance and potentiality, led by Emily Johnson, Ali-Rosa Salas, Alejandra Duque Cifuentes, and Jackson Police. But now I'll turn it over to Emily, who's going to moderate and lead this session.
Hey, everybody. I just want to make sure Jackson is on with us.
Yes,
Oh, awesome.
I'm here.
I just can't see you.
You can't see me?
I can't see you, but I can see everybody else. I'm really, really happy that we're able to begin together with this conversation. And I think we can all just take a moment to briefly introduce ourselves, and then I'll start us forward. I feel that I just introduced myself, so maybe Jackson, as a person coming in, maybe you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Ali, and then Alejandra.
Hello, I apologize for anyone that can't see me right now. I'm not sure if that is a global situation or
I can see
or
you.
not. Oh, you can?
We can see you. I think sometimes Zoom hides who is on video or not
Okay.
because of the number of participants, but you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Jackson Paulus. I am an artist from Tlingit Ani. I might say that I live and work between what are currently called Alaska and New York. I say currently called because I hold open the speculative anticipatory possibility that one day the names of these places might change. That we could say currently called instead of now called. I also recognize that language is a place of struggle. So I think that today, especially, that's where I begin. My work examines the limits and viability of desires for indigenous growth. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I began carving with my father, a Tlingit artist from the Tlukak clan of the Shilkut-Kwan, from what is known as Alaska at the moment. I say I belong to Tlingit territory, but I acknowledge and I read and I flag, and this is part of coming to it, an acceptance of red flags. I come to understand with you that this performance of selective specificity of acknowledging my own indigenous lineage can introduce a potential for alienation, and it can run the risk of introducing distinctions that ride in the danger of reifying expectations concerning temporal divisions. That is to say, temporal divisions between myself as representing or purporting to represent a certain group. That group being always continually conflated with the past. So those temporal divisions being between the contemporary and the past, but which still, those distinctions and disjunctions retain the possibility, I feel, to shift a focus toward cracks and logics that are considered foundational, such as ideals of equality and freedom, diversity, inclusion, recognition, which, while holding those potential problematics of those terms in mind, knowing now that we are attempting to move beyond that alienation, at least from each other at this moment. So we come together with shared concerns, which I think forces an examination of the formations of the category of indigenous as, given the etymology, something concerning the prior, and how can we move in strategic ways to open up that acceptance while still holding realities in which our acceptance, our offering generosity has contributed historically to dispossession of land, of territories, not only territories of land and water, but territories of representation, territories of mind. So that's just to say that I am very humbled as an interloper, as a multidisciplinary artist who has backgrounds not primarily in dance, in my own physical movement, and attempting to find ways to engage in ways that can move and expand possibilities of representation and allyship and accompliceship, that I'm very humbled to be here with you today and in the past few years to see the work that has been going and ongoing, and to see the kind of energy that you are all bringing us together with. So I am Gunal Chish, thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. And I did find your video. You look really good.
I have the enhancing feature turned on. So
I was wondering when Zoom's going to come up with filters. Like,
yeah, I think they're working on it.
Zoom has this thing that you can change your background to, like, if you're in
Yeah.
space. And I've been contemplating whether I should do it at some point during the keynote or not.
Right.
I did the DIY version of that. I just moved my desk so that
Cool.
I myself and not a messy kitchen.
I love the plant.
Coming from my head.
Sorry, I think I'm trying to take advantage of the vitamin D coming from the
Yeah, good. You need it. You need it right now.
I'm gonna try to move this monitor a little bit so maybe my face doesn't get totally washed out, but I am trying to take in the sun.
Good. I know Ali and Alejandra, we've already introduced yourselves, but just maybe if you want to, for this moving forward, just say something very introductory, introducing yourselves, moving into this conversation.
Sure, I'll begin. So good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm Ali-Rosa Salas. I'm a proud Nuyorican woman from Lenape-Hoking, and I'm honored and continually on the learning journey of an accomplice in this work, and am honored to be in collaboration with everyone who is contributing and sharing screens this morning. Each of you deeply inform how I'm thinking about my own relationality to indigeneity and the responsibility of presenters and the role of curatorial practice in particular, and mobilizing and resource redistribution. So I'm excited to get into all of that this morning. The work is never done.
Hi, I'm also gonna, Emily, if it's okay with you, if the next time each of us speak, if we could just take a moment to briefly describe what we look like and where we are for the members of our disability community that are low vision or blind and can benefit from those descriptions. So right now you can see my torso. I'm wearing a black shirt, long hair, attempting a bold lip with some lipstick. And I'm in my kitchen, in my studio, with a curtain that's hiding my husband on the other side, and white cabinetry. I am a fair-skinned Latina woman. Yeah, I mean, I am I'm an artist. I come to my work in dance with a foundation in theater practice. And I was a community organizer and educator and producer for many years before I decided to work behind a screen as an administrator, which was a hard shift at first, and have really been reflecting on what does it mean to be a person that lives in between spaces. I consider my ethnic, racial, and positional lineages to be placing me in an in-between space. I'm fair-skinned, but I'm also a Latina and an immigrant to the United States. This is not my homeland. And I come from a mix of people and a history also that has not been taught to me on who the original inhabitants of the land where I was born are and were. And so I come to my work as the executive director of an advocacy organization with a sense of, similar to what you said, Ali, how are we redistributing resources? How are we shifting power and what role as an in-between person do I play in that, as both someone that is a beneficiary and a recipient of oppression. And so I think that that's how I come to this conversation. It's how I come to my work. It's the sense of urgency that I have. Both Emily and Ali are two people who I have deeply admired and watched from afar in my work. And Jackson and I have serendipitously reconnected after being college mates some years ago. I'm not going to say how many, but it's really quite an honor to be a part of this conversation and to be welcomed to this table or this digital space that we are in.
Yeah, thank you all. This is Emily again, and I am sitting at my desk in my apartment. Windows in front of me, and behind me, my bookcase with my books, which is kind of hidden by my head. And my dog is sleeping still in bed. And so he's also hearing this conversation, which is really nice. I am, as I said, from Alaska. I'm a Yupik woman on my father's side. My mother is German and Irish, and she grew up in Lenape, actually. And I do this work as a choreographer, as Jackson earlier used the word interloper. I think of that space quite often, this space of creation, this space of breaking through, spaces of transformation. And I like to try to think of the ways in which my body, the movement that I create, the conversations that I'm part of can be part of this new worlding, I would say, be part of, or reworlding, I guess is a word that many people work with. I am fair-skinned, and I often use that privilege to work in spaces and to center indigeneity, Indigenous voices and experiences and knowledges and processes. And it's, again, just such an honor to be in this conversation with you all here, to learn and to listen and to continue with you all. And that's really just part of this. This is part of an ongoing continuance, and really happy to be here with you. And I'm going to, the description of this session, I think, is one good place to start, which we are speaking of solidarity, and we are speaking of power and resonance. And when I think of that, I think about how when we center Indigenous stories, artists, and knowledge, we confront the belly of the colonial beast. And that is ever necessary. And we obviously know it's extremely necessary right now. And so by being who we are in this work that we make, and by being who we are in how we make it, and here, I really am hearing Jackson's point about not creating a disparity. I am at this moment centering Indigenous people. When I say we generate healing and equity. But I know that we do that in a myriad of kinstillatory and expansive ways. And in my mind, we need to do that in relationality, in connectivity, in a deep weaving of knowledge, so that we do create this new world that is equitable. I often say that, we use this word equity, and none of us knows what it is because none of us have ever experienced it. And so I think overall, how is solidarity a place where we can really create equity? Because maybe it's never actually been created yet. In thinking through this session, I just want to name some other people because their thinking and their being is part of me being here together with you all. So I'm just going to name some people quickly who I spoke with about this session, and some of whom wanted to be here but then couldn't for different and clear emergencies taking place right now. And some of those people are Diane Freyer, the director of Amarinda here in New York City, which she's a filmmaker, and Amarinda is a service and advocacy org for Indigenous theater artists. And Muriel Miguel, from Spider Woman Theater. She is the grandmother of Indigenous theater on Turtle Island, and lives and works here in Lenape-Hoking in New York City. Karen Recollet, who works in intersectional spaces of Indigenous performance, youth, and diaspora, and hip hop, and Indigenous hip hop feminism. And she and I really work and think along these lines at the Kinstillatory. Ryan Eagle Pierce, who is a Lenape theater maker working and living here on his homelands. Devin Emery, who is also a Lenape artist who really works in a space of transformation, embodied transformation, quite in their dance practice, and also they are a nurse and they are currently on the front lines of COVID. S.J. Norman, a Koori artist, and Joseph Pierce Cherokee, who recently organized an incredible program at Performance Space New York called Knowledge of Wounds. Tanya Lukien Linklater, an Aluktuk choreographer who works with architecture of museums and held collections in relation to her knowledge production through embodied forms of movement conversation. And Sheldon Raymore, Lakota artist, multidisciplinary performance artist, actor, choreographer, and deputy director of American and Indian Community House. And I just name these folks because in this thought of solidarity and continuance, just thinking of all the myriad of ways that each of us are responding to and activating the many conversations and relationships that we're always in, and just honoring that. Jackson, I want to read this. I have 3 questions for us to just kind of talk together about just really quickly, but first I want to read this. There's another session that I had planned for when we were doing this symposium together live. And this will happen later in the year, in person if we can, or in a digital format if need be. But I just want to read it because I like it, and I think it is a nice place for me to ask these questions and for us to discuss. So the title of that session was also a provocation, and it's a little long, but this is it. It says, "Futurity moves through us, and we resist uncomplex notions of our knowledges as we dance from ground to sky in a network of relationships from time immemorial, that for some reason are still not considered on the same plane as other performances, even though all dance comes from us, and we fight appropriation and invisibility as we make in and through an astounding history of trauma and ongoing violence. Works of love and power that can transmute and heal, and sometimes also be as abstract as we want them to be, / someday Indigenous dance and performance will not be a separate category, and we will not need to direct our panels toward cultural competency. We will be known and respected and forgotten for our brilliance just as much as any other artist." And Jackson, I just thought that we could consider briefly together, you and I, and just have a brief discussion on these 3 questions. Really, what is, for you and I, what is our art and our scholarship? And in scanning I could say the field, but really it's the world. In scanning the world, I often see these areas of sparks where our work, I feel, is needed, both as artists and organizers. And I don't mean sparks. Sometimes those sparks are actually quite dark. They're like black holes. So I guess the question is, in scanning the world, where do you see those sparks? Where do you see your work as an artist and organizer needed, and where do you choose to do that work? And what happens when your work, when our work is, and the work of other Indigenous people is centered? Maybe we could start there.
Yes, this is Jackson Paulus. I will first address my sightedness in this digital space. I stole away from my family this morning, my wife and 2 children, my 3-year-old and my 10-year-old, leaving them to roam the apartment. I found a space in which I now have a semi-archival looking cabinet behind me. Self-description is perhaps not my strong suit. I'm not wearing a suit. I'm wearing a collared shirt. In terms of my skin, I'm not sure if I'm medium skinned. That may not be fair. I may be fair, depending on the certain conditions. My hair used to be black. It's now has some streaks of gray in it. So, and I will say that the kind of work that I'm doing, I am coming to an acceptance that for all the kind of tactics that I may think that I'm employing with certain formal qualities, that it is coming from me, and perhaps those apprehensions around self-description, for example, maybe intensifiers that contribute to my own decisions in terms of how I produce work. I work as an organizer. I've always considered myself an informant, as one who grew up performing their own culture behind ropes to tourists in Alaska, carving for boatloads of cruise ship passengers that would come in and view the so-called reproduction of Tlingit culture. I have an internalized resistance to what I perceive as potential dangers of that performance, that we are obligated to perform indigeneity in a way that is so easily collapsed into a reproduction of the denial of contemporaneity. So basically, that we are pushed into the past again and again and again. So in terms of reasons for working in the way that I do, which I will also say that I work as an informant to the public secret society, the New Red Order, with a multitude of Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaborators, but among them, Suzanne Kite, who is Lakota, Adam Khalil, Zach Khalil, Ojibwe filmmakers and artists, to investigate the desire for indigeneity and allow for that investigation to occur in a multitude of ways, sometimes formalizing the problematics of that, but never ending in terms of a calling out of appropriation, for example, that would not disallow the possibility of then calling back in. So some of the ideas behind that are that there are so many, at least these are ideas that arose prior to Standing Rock, when we started to see the potential extraction and what some may say excessive interest in the possibilities of Indigenous knowledges or epistemologies being used in a way that could remediate against the harms of hypermodernity, or our contemporary situation, that somehow Indigenous people or ideas, a new form of relationality, can change the world, which we don't foreclose that possibility, but we do recognize the extractive potential of that move from institutions and individuals. That does sometimes act in continuum with the long history of Indigenous people being used as informants for anthropological investigation, when those anthropologists were functioning under the idea that those peoples were disappearing, so that they needed to be saved, but then they acted as collaborators in the dispossession of objects and land from those people while trying to save them at the same time. So these are the conundrums out of which these are the conundrums that I inherit. And I see those as also in a continuum that is concomitant or coming at the same time as the dispossession of land and the historical inequity. So what I try to do in some of my work and organizing and collaborating with people is to propose those as problematics, to see the possibility that the reproduction of performances of indigeneity from non-Indigenous people, that is to say, like something that can be called out as strict appropriation, comes in a long tradition of playing Indian, of wanting to become Indian, wanting to become Native, to feel at home here, becoming Native American, basically a Native New Yorker, for example, so that, which ends up in the possibility that they are replaced. So to foreground an Indigenous centering, sometimes in my own experience, in just my own perception, which is riddled with apprehension. I fear and have feared the kind of simplification in terms of reception of Indigenous performances. That's not to say that I don't feel their power, that I don't feel the power of dance movement that comes from traditions that cannot yet be contained. But it comes out of feeling that the conditions under which those performances sometimes may occur are inequitable, that the conditions for apprehension are not, that we are not yet ready. And so what these are preconceptions that that are coming out of my own experience that are now in need of shifting at the moment. So in terms of the New Red Order, one of the ways in which those performances have been made manifest, no, I shouldn't say that word, and many other words, but is through the use of proxy, through the use of apology, through addressing the complication of apology, the complication of acknowledgement, the conditions under which the reiteration of acknowledgement can be susceptible to becoming an assuaging of guilt and then moving on, confronting the possibility for endless acknowledgement, which I think was incredible to see an organization today undertake such a complete intensive acknowledgement full of such intention with care. But recognizing the possibility that the acknowledgement can also be seen as in continuum with plain Indian. That is, I am attracted to a form of acknowledgement, so then should I be called out as a non-Indigenous person if I want to partake in such an acknowledgement? Am I participating in wanting to become Native by doing so? That's not to say that there should be a complete obstruction to that, but it's like what I am hoping to be a participant in is the kind of unfolding of these complications without allowing those to be cut off as sites where we cannot talk about them. So those are some of the intentions behind, I think, everything that I do.
Can I ask you one follow-up question, which is, how do you find, or how do you refuse extraction?
Yeah.
One of the ways that I might claim that I am, and this is probably has many blind spots, but I would say that in art presentations, that I might resist the reproduction of my own image, that this is something that I take and kind of seriously, in a kind of don't capture my soul, regressive, primitivist, native, savage kind of way. But not giving that language up, but the potential for those words and those terms to be, to have a particular power to upend expectation. But in turn, and part of my own desire, part of the way that I try to resist extraction, of course my image is being used now and I've given that up, but is to, as much as possible, acknowledge the conditions under which my extraction is happening right now. For example, what I'm doing now, like I'm naming that my image is being used, things that on other conditions I might be more sensitive to. At other times I might have been more sensitive to. But by hoping to build some of that complication of those conditions into the work so that it does become this kind of dialectic in which both of those things are, like the resistance and the acceptance can happen at the same time. Doesn't, of course, always happen, and writing that kind of line between what is acceptable, what is, sometimes humor overtakes other modes. It's hard for complete simultaneity, of course, but I do feel that some of those so those things are coming out of, I come to understand, an Indigenous perspective in which I'm kind of valorizing a kind of simultaneity, a continuous acknowledgement, despite my feeling at the humor sometimes of those like endless acknowledgements, that there is the potential to extend beyond an easy co-optation, and that the trick is to try to embed that complication and humor and collaborative spirit, and to invert in some ways the incorporative impulse, to acknowledge my own territoriality, to acknowledge to resist the easy labeling of Indigenous methodologies, epistemologies as completely counter to so-called Western forms of both government, worldview, and practice. So that sometimes leads to a giant cluster in which, like, what are we referring to at this moment? But those are some of the ways in which I attempt to resist that incorporation. And also, yeah, in terms of terminology, where language can, like as Bell Hooks says, language as a place of struggle. Knowing that we are using the Indigenous right now as a way of trying to be with each other in an expanded field, and that has its limits that can easily be called out by people who are not Indigenous or question where those lines could be drawn. Seeing the possibility of, if wanting to dismantle the ongoing effects of settler colonialism or colonialism in general, then are we okay with Indigenous in some ways as a category being involved in only the prior or as reactive to colonial conditions? And obviously many Indigenous people are making moves to cite their own specificity in terms of their own lineage. But again, that can become alienating when we have like multiple vectors of colonialism that have led to different forms of erasure and dispossession. Yeah.
I love being in conversation with you, Jackson, and it's making me think of, I was recently, when we could travel, I was on Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm forgetting one other. I was on Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh lands, and there's one other nation that I'm forgetting, in Vancouver, and it's with a Stolo scholar Dylan Robinson and Camille Usher. And we were just having a time thinking together on gathering. And when we could gather in person, and thinking together about the forms of gathering that we as Indigenous people create, and new forms that we might create, new forms that we might have not thought of yet, also ways in which we can police one another, also ways in which our gatherings can be alienating, also ways in which they can be absolutely reworlding. And so just thinking about forms of gathering and knowledge making, and I certainly recognize that I prioritize Indigenous knowledge and thinking and questioning and pondering and making. And I also recognize that I, as a maker, I make gatherings that feel good. You know, I host fires at Abrons Art Center every month that are Indigenous held spaces where the fire is centered, but everybody is welcome. And it's this gathering space where we just share space and time with fire and one another. I make these, you know, large scale performance gatherings that are sometimes 15 hours long, where the food justice and the place upon which we are gathering and the relationships to land, ancestry, star, future come from many Indigenous collaborators. But again, it's a space in which all are welcome. In that 15-hour long performance, we have a conversation at about 3 a.m. about what it means to be a guest on the lands that we are gathered, and we vision what a better future might be together. And I've been coming into an interesting space of questioning these really good feeling times that I generate together. I think we need those. I think those are generative, coming together in solidarity in spaces where we can think and feel and dream and vision and work together. But I'm just asking myself that question: how do I refuse extraction in those moments? And will continue to ask myself that question.
Yeah, thank you. I'll say that I'm on the perhaps another end where I'm questioning the continuance of my own interest in creating performance conditions where, or other modes of viewing conditions where that feeling is not prioritized.
A good feeling.
Yeah, a good feeling.
Yeah.
Where, for example, maybe have been so suspicious of that feeling that I felt the need growing up in my conditions to purport a situation where the articulation can occur, where welcome can become warning. Mm-hmm. But retain that ability to still then draw back in and become the welcome, mm-hmm. Which from my own experience is part of this kind of savage or Tlingit, mm-hmm. or I won't overlay it over anything else at the moment, but this kind of desire for difficulties to be acknowledged. But I know that is a very difficult place to sustain oneself, one's energy. So I appreciate your continuance of creating those places where, knowing the risks of extraction, that you have been so determined to create spaces where those feelings can occur when they are and have been in short supply. And we can make together those, despite our warnings, put forth conditions where we might be able to commune with each other in a way that does allow for that feeling.
Karen Recollet, who I mentioned earlier, she talks about this, she talks about rupture in a way in which, like, how do we enter rupture together? How do we, when rupture occurs, maybe this is a massive rupture, when rupture occurs, how do we stay in it in some form, in such a deep form of radical love that we find our way even maybe deeper into it and through it into new forms. And I like thinking about that, like that goodness, good feeling, gatherings, good time together doesn't necessarily mean that it is at like a base level of, like, we can go into these deep ruptures. We need to go into these deep ruptures because we need to figure out what they're housed within us, and they're housed within our relationships and our relationality, and come from and are amplified by centuries of colonial constructs. And so how do we sometimes go into those ruptures in such a way in which, you know, it's brave and it's hard, but if we can do that with goodness, perhaps, like maybe that is where we find equity sometimes, you know. And so sometimes maybe I do think that these I realize I'm saying gatherings when it's become almost a bad word. I don't want it to be a bad word. How do we create the gatherings where there is this goodness, where the container is of goodness, but so much so that we can go into those ruptures, I guess I think of. And I think that's really where solidarity lives, you know. Ali and Alejandra, speaking of solidarity and moving forward, I have a question for you two. But also, I think conversation has been so rich that I think I'll ask the question, but if there's something that you want to speak to that Jackson has already spoken of, please do so instead. But just to start, I want to share this quote from this incredible book that everyone should order. If you can see it, from Leanne Simpson, As We Have Always Done. And just this quote, it says, she says, I am in love with this quote. She says, I think we need to make a shift from indigenizing the processes that maintain the structures of settler colonialism and expand, deepen, and reactualize the processes and knowledges of grounded normativity, just to structuralize Indigenous nationhood and resurgence and mobilizations as a mechanism to dismantle the structure of colonialism in all forms. And so both of you are and do such good work in the world. And I guess my first question for you, or for you to discuss a little bit, is what happens in your institutions and in your, and if you are willing to share, in your own lives, when Indigenous leadership is defined, and what are some processes you have committed to, and what are next steps that you are working toward?
Ali, do you want to begin, or should I begin?
I think you should begin. I take up a lot of airspace throughout this event.
Well, such a rich conversation already. Emily and Jackson, I can just hear you both talk about these considerations, and I think with regards to my work, really, I think a critical turning point was in thinking about the role of curatorial practice and resource redistribution, which Jackson, who was my master's thesis advisor, thought alongside with me in a very beautiful way. And I think I've always been committed to curatorial practice as an act of service, and I think, you know, having a position at an art center that's also a social services agency, I think there's I feel just beyond privileged to have my artistic practice, which I consider my curatorial practice to be already deeply embedded with the history of place, the Lower East Side, Lenape hooking, and then also the act of service to a community. So I feel really privileged in having that value system already baked into the mission and the vision of Abrons Art Center, which I don't actually even think I mentioned that's where I work. And before I forget, I did want to give a description of where I am. I'm currently in a garage turned co-working space studio in Long Island City. And behind me, there are a series of file cabinets, a really impressive looking plant that is continuing to grow. I have short, dark brown hair. I'm fair skinned. I'm wearing these chrome glasses, hoop earrings, and a leopard, my favorite leopard print sweater. So I just wanted to do that before I move on. But where was I? Resource redistribution. And, you know, I think Emily, that quote that you shared just now is just so pertinent to the ways in which I've really had to and will continue to learn the power of language. Thinking around what does it mean to indigenize curatorial practice? Well, we know that curatorial practice in and of itself is a way of thinking that is colonial, that is about maintaining power through the arbitration of taste, and how resources are, you know, distributed is, you know, based on sort of hierarchical valuation of taste and the certain sort of ways that, you know, being in that kind of decision-making position maintains systems of power and also, you know, puts forth certain kinds of knowledges and knowledge production that has done tremendous damage. So I think I exist at this, you know, place of thinking about, well, you know, given the legacy of curation in doing that work and upholding oppression, in what ways can we not indigenize it, which is, you know, I think exactly what we need to be not doing, but thinking in ways of, you know, pushing the practice to be generous and to be of service through the redistribution of capital, of space. So that's really where I've been trying to focus my efforts, and I think particularly thinking about the ways in which, you know, curatorial practice is also a very individualist work, and how can, you know, and I think the values of the kinstillatory ceremonial fires that Emily hosts at Abrons really speak to the power of the collective and the you know, the power of interdependence, and the fact that in arts administration and in art making, interdependence is absolutely integral to everything that we do. So I think you know, in the work that Emily and I have embarked on together, that value system has remained at the center of not this indigenization, but a complete systems shift, which I think, especially given the current state of the world, you know, there's no other way. The only way out is through all of this. So I used to call myself an ally, and I've been trained that is not what I'm doing. I'm an accomplice. And just seeing this practice as a way to not reinforce hierarchies, but how am I bringing the resources that are in my reach to continue to amplify the work that's already being done. I don't pretend to be someone who's, you know, discovering or all these colonial terms that curators are often using to describe the work that it is that we do. It's just, you know, providing that support for all different kinds of knowledge productions to take root. So that's my practice in general, but I think at Abrons, there's been particular initiatives that have been, that continue to take shape and unfold. And I think, you know, to begin with our land acknowledgement, I think that's a process that we worked alongside Emily with developing, and the Linate Center. And Ali, I loved when you were speaking about the development of the Dance NYC acknowledgement. And I think as an institution for us, it was really important for us to be the authors of that collectively as a staff, and to also bake into it accountability measures, so that when, you know, the public reads our acknowledgement, it's not only stating where we are, the ancestral homelands of Untitled, but also our commitment to supporting Indigenous artists and Indigenous artistic practices. And we're currently on a journey of revision to that state, which will also coincide with other kinds of programming that is forever unfolding and ongoing. But for us as an institution, it's important that that statement is malleable and continues to change and deepen. And I think the accountability measures continue to become even more specific. And I think that for institutions and presenters, that's absolutely necessary to think beyond acknowledgement and to think actively as to what it is that we're actually doing. So that's been one anchor. And, you know, coming back to curatorial practice and sort of navigating the power in that position, the resources that are, you know, that kind of work provides. We've really been thinking and acting towards the dispersal of curatorial authorship as part of this work. So not only partnering with an organization like the American Indian Community House, where we hosted a curator in residence, Aru Apasa, who curated an Indigenous arts festival. And that's a critical facet of the work, is to really crack open what curatorial practice means. How is not only, you know, the financial resources and space and that kind of capital being redistributed, but also decision-making power. So that's also been a really core facet of the work that we're doing, is thinking about that sort of distribution of power and how that can already be baked into the ways in which our institution is thinking and working and serving not the community of the Lower East Side, New York City, artists and administrators alike. So thinking really holistically around those value systems of dispersion, I don't know if that's a word, interdependence, care, abundance. So I think those are I think personally, it's like you can't separate the embodiment of those values from the work. It has to be, we all got to be on the same page about that. And I think institutionally, you know, institutions are bodies. And I love, Emily, when you were speaking about that in your opening statement about the idea of bodies are everywhere. You know, institutions are bodies of people, of ideas, of infrastructure. So how are we being generous and intentional around like how big our bodies are?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also interesting. I've spent a lot of time in my making world imagining the walls not being there, right? Like being on stage or being in a theater and thinking of the ground and thinking of the space outside the walls. And now actually we are in this moment where our institution. We're not inside the walls of our institutions. You know, we always talk about the walls of the institutions being barriers and being like, you know, the doors are closed, et cetera. Like, so this could actually be an interesting moment to be like, we're actually physically in a very different relationship to our institutions, and how can that be embodied in a way that generates even deeper change, I suppose. And that systems change that you talk about is so imperative. And I guess I have one quick follow-up in that, which is just like, in that systems change and in those processes and in those values that you were defining, who do you rely on to hold you accountable in your process?
Well, that's a great question. I think I hold myself accountable to the communities that we're serving. So, you know, I think especially with regards to, I think the notion of acknowledgement, our land acknowledgement, and that commitment to constant revision and accountability has been due to the, you know, the partnerships and relationships that we've tended in the development of that acknowledgement to begin with, and then the programmatic initiatives that we've taken on, for example, with our partnership with the American Indian Community House, our partnership with you, Emily, and also the Global First Nations Performance Network, which is a larger consortium of presenters from around the world who are all accomplishing and thinking, you know, in parallel, intersecting ways around supporting Indigenous performing artists. So I hold myself accountable to those communities as well. I think the idea of that you were saying, Ali, in your opening remarks around the idea that, you know, in the development of this acknowledgement and how it's embodied at Dance NYC institutionally, that was due to a careful, mindful time and cultivation of relationships between human and, you know, human and non-human entities. So I can't underscore that enough, that I think that I feel so strongly about this work and these accountability measures, because it's impossible to do without the cultivation of relationships with people and other species. So not only the artists who we, you know, are commissioning to present work at Abrons, other curatorial colleagues who are thinking similarly, and, you know, the urban Indigenous communities of New York City who are looking to our programming in generative ways. So all of those intersecting human and non-human accomplices, I guess. But I can't underscore enough that it is because there's a care to the development of the relationships. I feel so strongly about them, you know, beyond like, you know, the conceptual lip service.
And I'm so glad that you're mentioning care, that you're centering care, care being what is so necessary at all times, and especially now, and how accountability can be care, solidarity can be care, deep systems change can be care. Like, I love thinking about it in that frame. It's like peeling away, and it's like finding like that care allows us to come at it in such a different way than sometimes we have been led to think that systems change needs to be about.
And conflict. I mean, in care, as you were speaking, that sort of deep, you know, how do we get to a place of like generative care that, you know, it can allow us, Emily, I think you were saying, to kind of, you know, get in the mud with each other and still feel like it's going to be okay. Like, I think care does not exist without conflict. And so I think institutionally, it's kind of nerve-wracking, or even personally, to be like, I'm, you know, engaging in a conversation that maybe I'm not as informed on. Am I going to offend someone? Are we making the right decision about this? And I think especially that comes up with land acknowledgements or protocols and things like that. Like, am I going to make a mistake? And we do. But that shouldn't be a reason why one is not doing something. So I think the risk of conflict is just an inevitability that is part of the work. And we all have to believe that we can move on beyond conflict, or sit and sit with it, because it's part of it. It's just relationships. I'm done talking now. Great question, Emily. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, the first thing I want to say is I want to address folks on Facebook that asked about the book, and make sure that you buy it from a place where the author actually makes the profit. So don't go to Amazon to get it. So just wanted to say that. We put that link on there so y'all can go find the book, find the author. The other thing I want to say, Ali, is that you specifically got a shout out from the Soul Arts Academy in the East Village, that are so grateful to Abrons and for their support in their programming.
Thanks. Thank you.
And Jackson, you also, somebody mentioned that a phrase that has remained present with them that you've shared is traditions that cannot be contained. Mm. That has deeply resonated with some of the folks on the other side of the digi space that we can't see. So I just wanted to first kind of name that and be in relationship with those folks that we might not see ourselves right now because we only see each other, but that they're present and listening. When you were speaking, Ali, and when you asked the different questions, Emily, what really, there are a few things that surfaced for me. The first thing that surfaced for me is a question that I have been asking myself since I took on this role in this organization, which is, what does it mean to occupy and thrive in spaces that are not made for us? And how do we then change those spaces or remake them altogether? And I think in many ways that has been the task that I have been navigating and exercising, both in my role, but also as an individual. I think a lot about my relationship to place. My relationship to place is complicated. I was brought to this country not by choice, and I think a lot about, as a child, and so I think a lot about my relationship to place and displacement often, and that really informs that question of what does it mean to occupy and thrive. And I say occupy, recognizing that that's probably the incorrect word because because of how it's tied to colonialism, but what does it mean to be in a space? And I think when I started working at Dance NYC, for me, it began as an internal, personal, human dialogue with myself and with my family. Even in doing some of the research, you know, I've been asking the question like, who am I? Who are my people? And where am I from? And I realized that I've only been asking that question within the construct of like U.S. imperialism. And I'm from Colombia, right? And that was the way that I would answer that question. I'm from Medellin, I'm from Colombia. But that within my familial lineages, we've never had conversations of who are our people, like who are our people, who are we a combination of? Because my family specifically, and I've seen it be true for other folks that might identify as coming from Latin America, we are in many ways the intersection of all of these colonial legacies, indigenous legacies, the slave trade, and forced migration from different diasporas in other continents. And so often we don't know because of the erasure, because of the systemic and chosen erasure. even within our own education system, right? Having gone to school in Colombia, there was not once a mention of the original inhabitants of that land. Although now in adulthood, I've learned a lot about the many tribes that are recognized and those that are not recognized within that territory that are present today, right? They're not, like Jackson was mentioning, a thing of the past, right? It's not this thing of like, whenever that happened and it's so far away that we are not connected to it and we're not going to address it or be accountable to it, right? But that it's a present moment. The other thing that struck me when you were speaking, Ali, was the relationship to conflict that comes with building relationship, and how the aversion of conflict or the aversion of any kind of discomfort, not even conflict, just discomfort, is like a tool that is used to oppress and create an invisibility of imperfection, which is such a critical part of our humanity and a critical part of what it means to be in relationship, not just with other humans, but with the earth and with the elements. And that it's not like a linear production-based relationship, as I think capitalism has tried to teach us, but that it moves in cycles and in relationship and accountability with itself. When I at Dance NYC, when I started working here, you know, my intention has been, and I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Ali, of like the curator as the person that gets to decide, and how it like limits autonomy, and it creates a gatekeeping relationship, right? Both around aesthetic and around opportunity, because curatorial practice comes with access to resources, place, money, all kinds of resources, contacts, networks. And what's interesting is that for me, within our institution, as I've taken the task of rewriting, I've kind of been using the same tool that was used previously to make it a place that was not always welcoming to me, to shift it. So, you know, we have a process wherein which we establish our practices as written documents. And that's like the tool that is used to give both authority and power to any given practice, whether that's an employee handbook or whether that is a set of questions on how we curate and why, whether that's how we hire, whether it's a process on how we the space that we work in our office, right? So it like all of these areas of our institutional life are given power through their written documentation. And so I took to task to completely rewrite all of those. So using that framework to create like a sense of permanence on opposite measures and modes of working, and opposite measures and ideas of questioning and relationship building. And so that has been one of the tools that I've used, right? Like, what does it look like when what used to say, I don't know, you can't wear this to work, and that's a real example, to, you know, completely change how we even talk about the human beings that carry the work, where clothing is not a conversation that needs to be had, where clothing is not a thing that requires prioritization. The other thing that has become really important to me in the work is, and I mention all of these things because although they weren't occurring initially from a vantage point of my thinking, how can I honor Indigenous leadership? It wasn't until Ali started speaking that I recognized that I was doing a lot of that work in similar ways. And I think that, you know, and you and I spoke about this, how there's work that's really obvious and intentional. Like, I reached out to you and we started a conversation and we started a relationship a year ago, or maybe a little over a year ago. But then there are also things that I've been learning by being just in this community and in relationships that are not always like, oh, I did this. Here's the check mark of the thing I did, but that it's becoming like an embodied questioning and like a pausing when something happens. And maybe I don't know why I had that pause. Maybe I don't know why there's a rejection to something. And it's not until later that I discover that it's because of that learning of being in relationship and listening and being in accountability, right? But the other thing that became very important in our practice at Dance NYC was, as a service organization, I think often what tends to happen is that the model of the nonprofit structure is to move us into a cycle of deficit-based thinking, wherein the workers and the people that are providing the service are putting their bodies and themselves on the line as ransom for the work that they're doing, because they believe so wholly in whoever it is that they're serving, in our case, the dance community. And that, to me, that action was our sowing a similar seed of extraction that was going to bear a similar fruit. And so one of the shifts that you know, and that meant having conversations with my board, for example, with the institutions that we get funding from, with our individual donors, about shifting how we are valuing the output of our work, or even what matters about our work, in a different way. And so, for example, I firmly believe that if the primary beneficiaries of our work are not the staff members that are doing it, then what are we doing? Because the first, if any, dance community that we are serving are the people that are in the room with us doing it. And I think really shifting that model of like, we have to give of what we don't have and extract in order to help others. And to me, like, and that has not been a perfect thing. I think that has, like, we arrived at like, oh, right, this is what it should be. And in these past few months, we're like, what does that even mean? Like, how do we slow down this machine that was made to work exactly as it's working, right? It's not like a broken machine. It is a very well-oiled machine, and it is functioning exactly as it was intended to be designed. So how, you know, like, do you stick like a peg in the bicycle wheel and like have everyone fall off, and then we just don't get on the bike again? Like, what do you do, right? And how do you do it while you're in the midst of working within these structures? So when asking all of these questions of me as a person in these positions of leadership, the people that I work and am first accountable to, how do we make those spaces of thriving? All of that has come out of this question and this value of this articulation of values that have taken so long. You know, we like published a version of them in 2018 after we did like 2 years of like talking on WhatsApp messages and sessions and trainings and at bars and at people's houses and at each other's, you know, like on the way home from work to the train, conversations with our staff, like, and so we wrote these things down as our first kind of desire for ourselves. And then once we wrote them down, it was like another 2 years of like, oh, wow, this needs to be completely reconfigured and reimagined, and what do they feel like in our body? And so we wrote these values down, and then that is what has propelled all of these different actions of, you know, we had an incredible intern, her name is Shruti Suryana Rajanan, who saw that we had started learning about land acknowledgements and said, it's not enough. And then we sat down as a staff and we're like, okay, how do Indigenous community, like what is this thing? What do they think it is? What do they say we should do about it? How should we be doing it? What should it include? What should it not include? What should we call ourselves? What should we not call ourselves when we're doing it? Is it a performance? Is it an action? Is it, you know, what is it? And so that is how our learning started. And even in approaching different elders and leaders in the community, I remember a couple of years ago reaching out to Diane, and Diane saying, listen, I hear you. I think it's great that you want to partner, and we don't have the resources and capacity to even start a relationship with you. And us honoring that, us being like, got it. We will be back when our offering matches what you need. and you know, and that and that the accountability that comes with that is an accountability, as Ali says, that is of me, the person, right? So what conversations do I have with my spouse, for example, about the jokes that are said? Like, we've started dissecting some of like the sayings our mothers say to us in Spanish and being like, ooh, that comes from, or that comes from, you know, and like, oh, well, we don't, you know, and like catching ourselves when we go to these like idiomatic expressions that are rooted in genocide, essentially, bringing that to the office, talking to our staff members and working with one another, not from like a hierarchical place, but from like a functional place. Like, I got this, you got this. Okay, let's turn around. Let's, like, you have, you know, like how do we both function within a recognition that again, the machine is running, but also that the people in it need to be the first ones there. And then how does it translate to all of the external facing things, right? How does it translate to all of the things that other people see and then other people can learn from? And so even in reaching out to you, Emily, I remember our initial conversations and even the conversations we've had in all these months, that it wasn't like, here's an email, come to this thing. It was like, let's get on the phone and I need to tell you who I am, who me, the person, is, before who the institution is, and before what can come out of it happens, if anything comes out of it. In terms of who holds me and us accountable, I think I have to hold myself accountable. I think within the staff, we hold each other accountable. And I gotta say, importantly, members of the community have my cell phone number. Like, people will straight up text me and be like, what the hell was that? And I want to talk about accountability because, you know, and I have many different people on, you know, those like cartoons of like the little like ghosts or devils or angels or whatever here. I feel like I have a cloud of witnesses that are, you know, my ancestors and my elders and the folks that are present and those that are to come, that are this cloud of witnesses, you know, and I ask myself constantly, like, oh, you know, maybe I should talk to this person, you know, like, and I check in with multiple people before certain decisions are made. But also recognizing that I think sometimes when we talk about accountability, is this expectation that like, well, now it's Emily's job to write to me if I say a racist thing. And now Emily has to do that emotional labor of coming and picking me up and getting me to get my shit together, pardon my French. And so, and I think that I wanted to name that because accountability has to start internally first, I believe. And the only reason why it becomes communal is because there's been an investment and a sowing of seeds so that there's actually a fruit that you can eat from and not like I'm gonna go grab something that doesn't exist or pull from something that I haven't sown. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alejandra. And I think that something that you said that really jumped out at me, or one of the things, was that when you begin this work, well, my interpretation of it is that when you begin this work, you see potential everywhere. You see the potential for change. You see the potential for power. You see the potential for the shift. And you also see everywhere, you see colonialism so deeply embedded. So beginning this work like just shifts, and I'm prioritizing C, but it's not a vision sense, that it is everywhere, that you sense and you feel and know that potentiality is everywhere and that colonialism is still so deeply embedded. And so as we all recognize again and again, both, how do we, as we move toward the potentiality, that is what we're focused on. And Alejandra, we've talked also so much, just in closing, about the importance of embodying all of these practices. And I think we've all spoken to that. And of course, with this audience and this gathering, knowing that this work is cellular. I always talk about this personally and institutionally. We're shifting DNA of organizations, and that means that we're shifting internally as well. We're shifting ourselves, we're shifting where we grieve, we're recognizing where we grieve, we're recognizing our own forms of racism and colonialism that have been so embedded. And so all of that shift is really, it's transformational, individually and collectively, when it is embodied with care. And so just in closing, because we're just a few minutes over, I think some of the things I've noted are that, and I just have a question, actually, in closing. I have a question for all of us, everybody who is listening in, who is gathered here, who might watch this in the future, and for those of us here as well, to think forward. And maybe there are places we can continue this conversation, that in systems change, in this no walls, no borders, in this refusing extractivism, in this centering of care, in this prioritizing learning, how, and in this creating spaces of thriving, how are we in solidarity right now and going forward when we are separated? So I really want to keep us in this. All of this work must continue as we're in this current moment of physical separation. So how are we in solidarity in this moment of separation? Yeah, I deeply thank you all on this panel. I love listening to you all and really love you all. So thank you for joining this conversation with such care and depth.
Thank you all so much.
Can I just say one thing, which I realized I forgot to mention in the very beginning, was that one of the ways in which, this is just a simple plug, so that's all it is, that's all I have time for, but thank you, first of all, and another simple plug to the members of the cohort 0 2020 who are involved in the, I guess, the takeover or their experiment with artist space, with performance space. Apologies. Performance Space New York. The members are Janice Amaya, the collective Brujas, Jonathan Gonzalez, Monica Mirabili, and other core contributors of the New Red Order, which include me, Adam Khalil, and Zach Khalil, which are working, as with all of us, to find ways to create expanded conditions and situations of care with each other. You can check out that new website at 02020.news, or it links to the Performance Space New York website. So I thank you all for that. I know we're 5 minutes over. I also want to say I thank you for positioning yourself as curators and as artists as accomplices, knowing that demands a certain level of crime, putting your body in the gears of the organizations, to acknowledge and not let go of self-interest, to keep that with us, because that's where we're starting from, starting from ourselves. So I appreciate that articulation and that acknowledgement and that unfolding today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, for those words. Yeah.
Okay, jumping back in here just to say thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Emily, for leading such an inspiring conversation. I know the folks who are tuning in have been sharing, you know, how the conversation has resonated with them and the way that it's making them, you know, shift their own perspectives. So thank you for that. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. It's been so great to see the comments coming in on Facebook, so keep it going. Tag us on Twitter at DanceNYC, Instagram at dance.nyc, and of course on Facebook at dance/NYC. You can use the hashtags DanceSimp, Simp2020, or DigiSimp.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.